gardening, which actually, Jonathan, you sort of are as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I found the passion really for it during lockdown as a way to improve and support my mental health through that awful time that we had. And I talk a lot about that on my social media accounts and through interviews and podcasts that I'm on. So I talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the day. So if you fancy coming back, then do come and have a listen. But I sort of know enough about lots of different subjects in gardening. I'm learning a lot through the week, talking to all these specialist people. But I'm not an expert horticulturalist in any one plant. So that's why it's amazing to have such wonderful speakers come up and speak with me all week. So today I'm joined for the very first time, because we haven't spoken on the stage before, Jonathan Shepherd.
Nice to be here.
Great to have you. Who holds the National Collection of Cosmos, and we have 3 stunningly beautiful displays here. You might have seen him already. You might have seen his stuff already on the Plant Heritage stand, and also the National Collection of Hollyhocks. And it's something, we're going to talk a bit about that. So, but this isn't something that you have done for very long.
No, it's not my job.
It's not your job. Tell us what your day job is and why you felt like you wanted.
Thank you. Yeah,
briefly.
My day job, I'm a political lobbyist, so I'm quite happy I'm here. And my phone's not on, and I'm dealing with lovely plants and lovely plant people.
But political lobbyist to gardening,
which is an improvement.
Yes,
an absolute improvement.
So what?
And I'm not launching my bid to be Prime Minister.
Are you not? No, not today. Not a campaign there. We're not on the stump here. No. So why did you want to create? Because there wasn't a national collection of Cosmos. What got you interested? Why Cosmos? First of all.
Well, I guess even going further back to that my wife is sitting at the front, so I better behave myself. Taking photos. We were fortunate enough. We bought a 2-acre plot in Lincolnshire. I've always liked gardening, and we wondered, what should we do with it? And it was literally as RHS members coming to Hampton Court, bumping into the fine ladies of Plant Heritage, and I advise anybody who's interested in plants to go and see the Plant Heritage stand.
We'll talk about them a bit.
And talk to them. They're amazing. Bumping into them and finding out that there was neither a national collection of hollyhocks or cosmos, and they were both plants that I quite like to grow. One has more problems than others, but it wasn't that I'm particularly solely interested in them. I love to have dahlias, I love alliums in my garden, but it was the challenge of hearing that there was no national plant collection. Yet I assumed that certainly with the hollyhocks, aren't they a well-loved, even though they're a non-native, that's a well-loved British cottage garden flower. So they challenged me in a way to say, okay, well you're growing them, here, have this leaflet, go away and have a think, but why don't you become the national plant collection holder? And that's kind of how it started. I always believe that every achievement starts with a decision to try. So what would have been the worst that could happen? I try and source some seeds of different cultivars that I'd never grown, which was part of the learning experience, and where do you get them from, and who stocks this and who stocks that. Give it a go. And to cut a long story short, that I think it's been about 2 years since I established the hollyhock collection, which we can talk about the challenges of doing that in itself. That was just as COVID kicked in, so my wife could tell you more, but we put plants into the ground and the moles were pushing them up, and the blackbirds were pecking at them, and the rabbits were harvesting the whole lot of them. So there I am buying 100 black bins from places like Screwfix and Wicks to plant them in planters. And initially I thought, well, let's try for 2 collections at once, and then found that was don't bite off more than you can chew. So 12 months ago was when, having sort of put the work in on the hollyhock collection, we did the Cosmos, and Cosmos are obviously Cosmos by Pinartis, their annuals. So it was again sourcing seed, finding out who stocks what, who bred what, and building that collection up. And that collection was awarded last June. And then sort of fast forward to now, I've never exhibited a flower at even a village show. But I thought, well, why not give it a go? What's the worst that can happen? So we hired a Luton van, and Adam Frost said, get some of those Dutch plant trolleys because they'll all fit in. Didn't tell me that some Luton vans are smaller than others with the door, so I'm angle grinding the tops off them all. And Julie's driving the van down, and I'm telling her to go slow and not hit potholes, and we've got our Cosmos here. So that's fast forward from just having no experts again. I've got no sort of horticultural training. We're learning day by day. We're doing more research into the hollyhocks and the Cosmos.
Well, I think that's. I think they look absolutely stunning. I think your collection is absolutely stunning.
I'll give you the money later.
It's beautiful, and people I've spoken to online and in person have said that they're loving the fact that Cosmos are here this year, and I just think they are. Who grows Cosmos? Yes, quite a few. Who grows hollyhocks? Okay.
Who gets rust?
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that someone, this whole notion of having a plant collection, having a national plant collection. A couple of years ago I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know who Plant Heritage were. I didn't know what having, and I always thought it was someone that had specialist knowledge in that plant that had been doing it for years. But actually, anyone can have a national plant collection if you're interested in a specific plant and you want to start collecting them for your own personal, as a hobby, which is what you're doing effectively. You can establish the national collection. And I think there's something. I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah, and some there's a national. What I find amusing, there's a national collection in Buckingham Palace. So the Queen's got one, and then I just snigger and say, and there's two in my garden.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet there will be one in somebody's living room.
Yeah,
because it's so. In my mind, look, we had this 2 acres. Hollyhock should need a bit of space to do this. Spider plants, less space. So the person who's got spider plants, they're growing in their house. And there's so many different plants that haven't got national collections. And for me, it's really important. And they did a little spot on Gardener's World, which didn't make the final cut, where I talk about fashion. Because fashion, that's fine in one way. We'll talk about this is the in plant. And we could talk about clothes. If something goes out of fashion, it might come back into fashion 10 years later, and you've still got the designs. If a plant goes out of fashion and nobody's growing it, it might become extinct. Yeah. And I think that can be a worry. And certainly with hollyhocks, they're always spoke about, they're so old-fashioned, which is why quite often you don't see them in garden centres, because they're not a fashionable plant. And it's okay saying we saw it with dahlias, they'll come back. Yeah, but if you've lost that cultivar, they won't come back. No. Because nobody's got the seed, it's not grown anywhere.
And whilst we're here then, whilst we're talking about Plant Heritage as well, do go and see, because lots of people think Plant Heritage is part of the RHS, it's not. Plant Heritage is a separate charitable organisation and that are doing great work preserving as many different types of plants and flowers as we hope to preserve for posterity. And I think what's interesting about gardens, not dissing garden centres of course, I'm not in a place, I'm sort of put into context. There is a certain commercial aspect to certain, I'm going to say, my wife works at B&Q, so I'm going to mention B&Q. But for example, they'll have one type of dianthus, and that'll be the only type that you'll ever see there, and that's what people go to because that's there and it's ready available, and it fits on a commercial trolley, like this. So you never really see tall, really apart from trees and things, tall plants like tall perennials in garden centres because it's not commercially viable. So what Plant Heritage are doing are ensuring that we still keep those varieties going. And lots of the growers in this marquee do have specialist, rare, new, old varieties that we can't get anywhere else. And I think that's the really important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We found it this week again with the Cosmos that so many people assumed that they were just a dwarf bedding plant.
Yeah.
So we brought a few seeds along. Yeah. And I assumed everybody had seen cupcakes blush or cupcakes white, and then we thankfully restocked, but we sold out to what we thought we'd need in a day and a half because people haven't seen the plant. Even though it's an annual, people have never seen that plant in a garden centre. Now, I'm not blaming garden centres. They quite rightly want to make as much money as they can. That's quite right. But also, go to your specialist nurseries. And as I say, not that we're a nursery, but there are specialist nurseries with plants that are as beautiful, if not better, than what you'll see in a garden.
But we can come to you today and buy some of the seeds of the Cosmos.
Yeah, you'll see somebody far more attractive than me. That's far nicer.
Tell me about so you were approached by the art and they said, why don't you hold the national collection? Why don't you start with the Cosmos? What were you growing already? Was it how many varieties were you growing?
What, before?
Yeah.
Of Cosmos?
Yeah.
Probably just thought I'd get a couple of packet seeds from Thompson and Long, but I know I like them.
Okay.
I knew that actually, as a plant, for me, and for most people, it's easy to grow from seed.
Yeah.
You can collect the seed, so if you're a bit tight like me, and you don't mind a bit of cross-pollination, you might never have to buy seeds again. Why wouldn't you grow it? Why would you go and buy an £11 plant when you can spend £3.50 and get loads of them?
Yeah.
And it was almost, because I'd done the hollyhocks, why wouldn't I have a go at this? Because the hard thing was almost learning. In my garden, I'd never label a plant, because why do I need to? If it looked nice, I didn't care what the name was. That's a white thing, and that's perfect. Whereas the bigger learning experience was logging stuff. Where did you get the seed from? Did it come true? Does it come back again? How do you isolate seeds? Which is going to be a whole other ball game of Gardener's World came when they were filming. The guys were laughing at me saying, because the number of bees in both the hollyhocks and the cosmos, which come onto why I don't spray particular insecticide, was spoiling every one of their shots. The bumblebees were going in the lens of the camera, and they said,
They like a bit of that in garden as well, don't they?
Yeah,
Up close bees.
There were a lot that day, which is the biggest compliment I can get for new collections.
Yeah.
But it's a problem for if you're trying to isolate plants.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I've got to learn to do going forward. That if I've got, let's say, the Watchman hollyhock, I need those seeds to come true.
Yeah.
And so, do I then have to start to investigate doing root cuttings and all the rest of it?
Yeah.
Does this variety, will rust kill it? Is it really a short-lived perennial, or is it actually going to be a biennial and the rust will kill
Become a
it?
bit scientific with it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the area that I'm no expert in, and that's what I almost want to impart to other people. Which is what you said. You do not have to have that horticultural training for plant heritage. They will give you a lot of advice. So all my plants are logged on this newfangled database that talks to the RHS. So actually, things that I'm finding out now are feeding into the RHS. So one example is there's a hollyhock called Pemba Cassis. I've got another one that's called Blackcurrant World. It's meant to be very rare. It's the same. I am convinced it's the same plant, that somebody's changed the name of the seed. But where is that log? There's Plant Finder, but there's no seed log. So you feed that information. Now the only way you'll find out is almost by genetically testing it. That might not get done. So I feed this back to the RHS and I'll say, well, who needs to know? It's like, well, there's no international registration of hollyhocks, so maybe you'll want to do it. It's like, well, hang on, I can only do so much, but it's this kind of information that, generally it's not that important, but actually it is important. It is important that cultivars are rightly labelled and all that kind of thing, and that's sort of the aspect that I'm learning. But I don't want to sort of give the impression it's really complicated, because it's not, because you can start small. I'm not expected to have every hollyhock that's in existence. I could have maybe 30 different cultivars, grow 5 different plants, and build from that.
And also, just because you have one national collection doesn't mean someone else can't have another.
No, and you can have national collections based on different sites.
Yeah.
So, if 5 different groups or bodies or gardens wanted to hold a dispersed national collection, that can be done. And Plant Heritage will have a list of all these different plants that haven't got a collection, from house plants to probably trees. So trees are more likely you're going to find them in botanic gardens unless you're very rich and own lots of acreage. But some of the smaller plants, say, could be done in your house.
So let's do some practicals. Let's do some practicals. Let's do some actually, if you want to grow some cosmos to start with, then we'll do hollyhocks. So fairly easy to
I think
grow.
so. I'd grow them from seed. Why wouldn't you? I wouldn't buy the plants. Although for national collections you can buy plants in and become part of your national collection.
Yeah.
I grow them from seed. Most seed packets will tell you can sow from February. Where we live in Lincolnshire, I wouldn't, just for the fact that even with a massive polytunnel, because sowing early brings its own problems.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you can have a pot that's almost getting pot bound. It really must go in the garden, but it can't go in the garden until the danger of the last frost come.
Yeah.
So you learn from your mistakes. I've lost 200 plants before when the last frost did come, and I covered them with hessian, and it didn't really matter because they all went nice brown and slimy.
You can start growing indoors.
Yes, exactly. So you could, which is why you should probably sow a little bit later, so that it doesn't become leggy.
Yeah.
So that by the time the plant's got big enough, it's time that it can be hardened off outside and essentially, I use the phrase whacked into the ground. I'm not precious about these plants. I think sometimes we can all care for plants too much, and a bit of neglect is no bad thing. So for example, with Cosmos, there's been regular questions asked at the stand. Why are yours so big? I do a little schoolboy snigger first of all, and then essentially go that there are cultivars which are bigger than the ones you see in garden centres. Why aren't mine flowering? And I can provide a whole list of different reasons that frankly I stole from somebody else about why cosmos don't flower. One of which is that you're giving it too much nitrogen feed, so they just become greener and greener and greener. You've got to remember they're natives of Mexico and South Africa, so they grow in poor soil, it rains, and then they just bloom up. So, you know, I know members of my family, well, Julie's stepdad loves his plants too much and almost kills them with too much love.
Yeah.
So he'll be watering them with Miracle Grow every day and it'll go green. Why isn't it flowering? It's like, stop giving it all that stuff. It doesn't need it.
No.
Might need a bit of feed. So easy to germinate. Pop them out.
Growing in a general...
Growing. I use peat free,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
which has its own issues. But what I wanted to show at this flower show, that I've had people come up to me and say, all peat free is rubbish. Some peat free is not ideal. Peat free can, from one different manufacturer to another, can be very different, and I use it for different things. Water goes through peat free for me quicker, so it has that issue. It can therefore wash any feed that you give any plant out quicker, so you have to think about that. So it makes the job of growing plants, I think, harder, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if we're thinking about trying to be more sustainable. So,
And what Rob Hardy will tell you, so Rob Hardy's plants, if you know Rob, you've been to his stand, he grows everything peat free because he believes in actually treating them mean, and actually what they will then do is work harder for you because they have to find the water better and have to put a better root system together. So he's got a lot of interesting points about peat free. But yes, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so in that aspect, I think a lot of people have said that they have slugs as an issue. Now I think we're quite lucky we don't, but I think that's because we've got more wildlife eating the slugs than the slugs. But that's because it's a plant that puts on lots of green, and the nice fresh green is probably like sweet and tasty to a slug. So if you've got slugs, there are plenty of ways of preventing slugs now that aren't the old-fashioned chemicals. Or plant them out when they're a bit tougher. Our biggest problem is rabbits, and even when you can see on our stand there's one that's Gloria that's about 6 foot tall, it'll get that thick that even a rabbit won't really fancy it and go on to something else. And they will, what I like about them is I call them a generous plant, as in they will flower all the way to maybe October, as long as you're into deadheading, which is why I'm constantly carrying around secateurs, because from 1 hour to the next, if it wasn't on a stand, they'd probably, if I could reach them, you'd be deadheading them. And it just encourages more flowers.
We want full sun?
They like full sun, as I say, because they're native of Mexico.
And good in pots, but also...
Yeah, they do. I mean, there's some cultivars that on the whole, you know, the flower shows aren't necessarily, they're a bit of theatre, it's not sort of how they'd naturally be done. That's quite big for a pot, so that's purity. So it's a heavy pot, but if you put a big old one into a light pot, it's going to fall over and break your pot. So some of the bigger cultivars are probably more suited to the ground, and that's no bad thing. All I would say is don't have too rich and fertile soil, otherwise you'll have the same problems as feeding it too much. So one lady was asking, can I put my cosmos in between my roses where I've put a load of horse manure that's rotted down? It's like, well, we can, but it might be too rich and you might get the big old monster green thing and be bemoaning, why is my cosmos so terrific with no flowers? Back to Rob Hardy's, treat them mean.
Amazing. Okay.
And they sell seed. They will sell seed everywhere. But if you're mean like me, you collect the seeds, and then it's just so much easier to sow them in pots next year. But they'll cross-fertilise. The bees will be all over them, so you might not know what you're going to get.
As you said, amazing for pollinators. So
we've had butterflies all over them in the tent this week, which is the bees will find them when you grow them.
So amazing. So let's while we've got you, talk about hollyhocks as well then.
Yeah.
And you've had more challenges with them?
They are. Well, it was more challenging in the sense that when we were doing them, it was during COVID. So when they were obliterated by rabbits, how do you solve that problem? You can't go to a shop. So it just seems very strange that when 100 black and silver dustbins are being delivered, the local constabulary probably think you're growing cannabis in your back garden or in your potted lawn. So that was a challenge. They're challenging because of rust, and as you know, the fact that whilst I would reserve the right to use an antifungal spray if it was going to save the national collection, I'm not into spraying them. So everybody knows that I would never exhibit hollyhocks here because I don't think there's a way you could guarantee exhibiting them without rust. And if you're spraying them with antifungal, you can't call it a pollinator-friendly plant if you're killing the pollinators to get the perfect plant. But that's my call. So the way I deal with rust is you take it off, They wouldn't let me to stay on Gardeners World. They might burn the leaves, but they might go in an incinerator. If not, your counts have been. I don't put them on a compost pile just so it doesn't spread the rust.
Yeah.
You'll mulch it so that if there's anything in the ground, it doesn't blow up. But it's spread by wind. And I always, I want to manage people's expectations. Your hollyhocks might not get rust, but expect them to get it. And if it does, take the leaves off and enjoy the blooms. So use it as a backup border plant. It's no different in my mind to almost when you display alliums. All across the show here, there's no allium leaves on show because some people don't like the yellowing of the allium leaves. Well, the rusty leaves are ugly, but the blooms are still quite nice. It can weaken the plant. Some people will, you should remove the plant because it's got rust. I'm not doing that with the National Collection. I'm not just because it gets rust. I'm not removing the plant.
And also, you're learning from the National Collection.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So because it's almost only in its second year, I need to know which might be a weaker variety with rust,
yes,
which, quite frankly, gets it. So the Ficifolia ones are meant to be more rust resistant. They're the ones with the fig leaves. They still get rust, but there's some on the front of my house. You just pull the leaves off. The flowers look amazing. It'll eventually die back. We'll put it back to the ground. Next year it'll come back. Absolutely a perennial.
And how high can we go for?
Oh, massive, huge, way over here.
Really?
Yeah. People say again, it's with the National Collection, it's almost you do what you can given the size of it. So should you stake them? Well, if it's in a windy spot, possibly. But when you've got maybe 70 different cultivars and 5 plants in the ground and 5 in bins, you multiply. I haven't got enough money to buy stakes. So when the Lincolnshire wind comes across, some of them will flop, some of the bins will fall down. Pick them up. They're not growing straight, but that's not the purpose of it. It's not the purpose isn't to almost showcase a beautiful garden. It's to find out about this plant and the cultivars. It's to find out, is that plant really that plant? Are the old historic Chases variety? Is Peaches and Dreams really one of them? Things like that.
And cutting back, you said.
Yeah. So at the end of so they'll flower, and then at the end of the year,
what's the flowering period?
Ours are flowering now, and will flower all the way. It's almost all the way similar to September.
Yeah. And
then they can start to look quite ugly. I collect the seeds and create. I've got more hollyhock seeds than probably anybody in the country actually, because I'll collect them all. Then with them, I did a mass planting down one side of our whole plot because I think that actually looks nicer than the collection. The collection is almost quite austere and scientific in these bins. A mass planting of them is amazing, but all those are mixed.
Yeah.
They've crossbred. And you literally could say each one's now an individual new variety, but it's not been bred. And we were lucky enough that one actually was crossbred that I'm trying to then isolate, and we're hoping to name that. It'll be in Gardens Illustrated in July.
And so you plant them all together. You don't plant anything else with them?
In the collection?
No, with just you generally.
Yeah,
what do you plant with them?
So I'd have them at the back of the border.
Yeah.
Because the leaves will be or can be ugly.
Yeah.
So you could have them underplanted with dahlias.
Yeah.
And then then even if it gets rust, you can pick them off, but you might not see them. I mean, the ideal is to remove the rust so that the infection doesn't keep coming back. Mm-hmm. But if you underplant them, that's the best thing, so you can see the spires.
And they're full sun again?
Yeah, as I say, they like sun. They don't like. Essentially, it's quite hard in this country because we get plenty of rain, although you wouldn't know it at the moment. That if their leaves get wet, that helps spread fungal infection.
Yeah.
So that's part of the problem. So my best hollyhocks are ones that I sowed in raised beds in my polytunnel, and then decided I didn't want raised beds because watering raised beds in the polytunnel, the water was just ridiculous. I left them, I chopped them straight down to the ground, so the polytunnel obviously didn't get any rain in. The ground doesn't get watered, it's just 4 pots. It's 72 feet long, so this year it got up to 46 degrees whilst I was raining. They are the best hollyhocks out of them all. Really? I suspect it's because the wind isn't spreading so much rust because it can't get in. So they can cope with extreme heat. Because some of them are from areas where that's where they're natural. They will find their own water. If the water table's not too far away, they have a long tap route.
So not obsessively watering them, you don't need to do that?
On my part, I don't use a tap. So it's only rainwater that I'll either collect over winter. Now I've got a big plot, so you can say you're fortunate, so I can store 20,000 litres, but at the same time I've got a lot of plants that need it. So you can scale that down. Anything in the ground on my plot doesn't get watered once it's in.
Okay.
I'll water it to establish it, but then that's it.
Jonathan, you're fascinating. I could talk to you all day. I want to have time for questions, but we give Jonathan a round of applause for his amazing insight into the National Collection stuff, which is so inspiring. I mean, do go and talk to Plant Heritage as well. Do go and see Jonathan's stand if you haven't already. But if you've got any questions about Cosmos or hollyhocks while Jonathan's here that we want to ask him, or anything about the National Collection or how you keep a National Collection that we haven't covered, is there any questions? Let's have one. It'd be good to have one, wouldn't it?
Julia will have one, I'm
Sure
sure.
then. No, Shane got one. Anyone got anything? Obviously, do come and talk to us if you want to in a minute. But thank you for listening. Really appreciate that. As I say, we've got a programme of talks for the rest of the day until about 4 o'clock. So do come back if you want to listen to any of them. The timetable is here. I hope you enjoyed that. Your Lord Hollyhock, I've just realised there. There we go. Yeah, self-appointed Lord Hollyhock. Come and talk to me if you want any more information. Do go and admire his Cosmos. And thank you for listening.